which is this one, and they both have multiple timelines. Basically, in The Girl Who, it has 3 different narrators and 2 different timelines, but then 1 extensive in-chapter flashbacks. So it's actually got 3 timelines, 3 characters, and it jumps around all over the place. And so clearly I was taking on a little bit there because that was my first book. Then also Dead Lucky has 2 narrators, or 2 main narrators, and 2 different timelines as well, like present day and 3 years ago. So yeah, it's obviously something I use a fair bit and something I enjoy reading in other books as well. I love nothing more than flashbacks and triple timelines and switching narrators, and but obviously it has to be something that works for you as well. And I'm going to be trying to talk about how to make it work and little tips and tricks, etc. during this session. I'm going to sort of suggest a few exercises and things to do, but there won't be anything to do kind of live. And also the other thing is, any question you have to ask, you can ask anytime if it's relevant to what I'm saying, or you know, whether it's just a particular troubleshooting problem you're having with your own manuscript, you can ask anytime, and we can dig into that. Okay, so yeah, multiple timelines and narrators. There are quite a few books that do this. I will try and share with you a few examples now, and it takes a while, and I'm sorry. So yeah, this is some of the books with multiple timelines and narrators. You've got Nowhere Girls by Amy Reed, which is multiple narrators talking about, they're all investigating how a group of privileged boys are getting away with raping a girl who left town in the aftermath of what happened to her. Win, Lose, Kill, Die, which is Cynthia Murphy's very tense thriller, which has 2 points of view in it. All the Things We Never Said by Yasmin Rahman, which is quite really effectively uses multiple narrators. Pulp by Robin Talley, which has got dual timeline, one present day, one 1950s, sort of comparing, contrasting what it's like to be gay in those times. Dead Lucky is me. I've told you about Lock the Doors by Vincent Ralph, has both a dual timeline and dual narrators, and does that very, very effectively. This Can Never Not Be Real by Sarah Milano switches narrators pretty much, like there's 5 narrators, and sometimes there will be just 2 lines for one narrator and it'll switch to the next one, but she makes it work really, really effectively, and it adds to the kind of tension of the book. And Mina and the Undead by Amy McCaw uses has a dual timeline, but uses letters and diaries to kind of flashback to the past, so they uses that as kind of a narrative example. So yeah, there's quite a few people that use that. I think I've got sharing now. Yes, I have. So yes, there's quite a few examples of how it's used effectively in young adult fiction, and I think the reason that we like it so much is because we're real suckers for a first-person narrator, and first-person narrators can be very limiting because you can only see what that person is seeing, and so adding extra narrators is a good way of building tension, drip feeding information, keeping the reader hooked on your stories. It works especially well for thrillers because then you get to know something that your main character doesn't know. But the other thing is, it also keeps me interested because I find it fun sometimes to shift a perspective, and often when I'm working on one timeline idea, it'll give me ideas for what's going to happen in the next one. So it keeps things kind of fresh for me as well. So yeah, switching narrators quite common in YA. Timelines not such a common thing in YA, but when it's very common in adult psychological thrillers, you see it all the time. But when they are used in YA, they're used really, really effectively. Flashbacks are very common. In things like One of Us is Lying, there's lots of flashbacks that flesh out all the sort of dark secrets behind the the various different suspects while as the novel progresses. So yeah, there's some really good examples out there. Definitely explore some of those if you get the chance. It's all, I mean, the first recommendation if you're going to do something with a dual timeline or with multiple narrators is to read loads of books that have that structure, and then you pick up all the tips and tricks from reading them, obviously. So I'm gonna try and divide it up now and talk first about head hopping. Oh yes, so if you have a question for me, just use the live chat facility if you're watching on YouTube, or leave a comment on Facebook, or reply on Twitter, and then Madeline will pass the question on to me, and so I can answer it whenever you need to know. So because I'm quite up for troubleshooting other people's manuscripts while we're in this workshop, because it is, after all, a workshop. So yeah, reasons to do it. It allows you to write in close first while having a literal diversity in characters. So like in The Nowhere Girls by Amy Reed, the story of the boys getting away with sexual assault on a girl has a different effect on various different characters, and it shows the impact of it across the community rather than just being one girl's story. So, you know, there's the new girl in town, there's a cheerleader, there's a gay girl who's still in the closet. Across town there's a trans woman who's reacting to it as well. And it's basically a way to create, you know, if you're writing about something that impacts over a large group of people or a large community, then it's a good way to really bring that home. And also, you know, it helps with Amy Reese's theme about finding common ground in different forms of female identity, you know, about sort of the way society divides us and how actually we've got a lot more in common than we think we are, and having multiple narrators kind of that really means that she nails that theme. So there's literal diversity in characters, but there's also diversity of voice. So as in, you can see the same situation from a different point of view. So we write a lot in the first person, which is limiting, and it's sometimes refreshing if your reading sees things from different angles. So for example, in All the Things We Never Said, Yasmin Rahman examines anxiety, depression and suicidal feelings, which is obviously a really important and quite serious topic. But if you are writing first person, close first person for, you know, of someone who has a mental health issue, and they're not seeing themselves in the way, they're not seeing reality or their lives in the way that's actually the rest of the world can see. So it adds strength to have other characters looking, you know, who also all have their own issues, but they're looking at the character, you know, they're looking at each other and assessing each other, and it gives you like a different perspective on what that character's going through. So that's really kind of used very, very effectively there. It helps kind of ground the readers and also lifts the story, because obviously these people are going through two really awful things, and it's quite hard to be in their heads for long periods of time. So head hopping kind of can provide a little bit of relief for the reader on that as well. And yes, each character sees a positive in the other ones, which they don't see in themselves, which adds, you know, depth to the characters and is really helpful. Another way to do it, or reason to do it in thrillers, is amping up the creep factor, which Cynthia Murphy does very effectively in Win, Lose, Kill, Die, because one of the narrators is the killer. And so, you know, you have a murder, and then the next chapter, the killer's kind of pretty much smugly saying how much they enjoy doing it, and it's really super creepy. In The Girl Who, which was my book, I originally had two narrators, which is Ellie, who witnessed the murder of her mother and sister when she was a child, and has grown up with this, you know, awful trauma behind her, but also with this public attention on her, you know, showing you know, how the media can kind of make heroes out of people that have been through something terrible, and how that's actually quite a burden to grow up with. So I've got Leah, and then there's Ellie, who is, you know, very fun, very bubbly, outgoing, loves glitter, wants to be a YouTuber, and the two of them get thrown together because they become stepsisters. And that was a really sort of interesting dynamic. But then one of my beta readers said that it needed to be more crimey, and she was absolutely right. And so I introduced a third perspective, which is Boyd, who is the person who committed the murders, and because obviously you see the media hype from Leah's point of view, with the newspapers calling her a hero and everything. But, you know, Boyd did a horrendous, horrible thing, but was also demonized. So I got to talk about him and what he was going through, and how, you know, it's not really that simple. Someone can do a horrible, commit a terrible, terrible crime just from being in a very, very bad place. So that added a kind of darkness to it, and also gave me a chance to give Boyd a voice, which was also really interesting. But yes, it also really amped up the creep factor, because poor old Boyd was really going through it at the time. The other brilliant reason to head hop is building tension by creating little mini cliffhangers throughout the book. You know, you see somebody's falling off a cliff, and then it's the end of the chapter, and then the next chapter your other character's just walking down the street. Can be a bit infuriating though, so use it sparingly, because yes, your cliffhangers have to be real, otherwise it does get very frustrating. So I mean, but basically when it boils down to it, switching point of view has two main purposes. It's either to tell your reader more or to tell them less. So it could be that you want to drip feed them information your main character doesn't know. But on some occasions, if you have an unreliable narrator, you can switch away so the reader can't see something that the main character is up to, and they're seeing the situation from another person's perspective as well. So, you know, there are different ways you can use it to kind of either inform your reader or completely fool them. If you can think of any other reasons to do it, or any reasons why you're doing that, please suggest it in the chat, and also suggest any multiple perspective reads, because I always need more books on my TBR. I've only got about 5 million, so any extra ones are very, very helpful. So, I mean, one exercise to try with this, and it's something that you can either do now or you can do later, is to write about an explosion. I mean, we're thriller writers here, so hopefully it's not too triggering, but I would like to share. So basically you've got, and here it goes, and it takes ages again. I apologize for this. Thought it'd be quicker. Okay, so you can look at the perspective. You can look at one event from 3 different perspectives. That's really scratching the surface of what multiple narrators are all about. But it is a fun exercise to try. If you're talking about an explosion, you can look at it from 3 perspectives. You can look at it from A, someone trapped in the building when the bomb goes off. B, the detective character, who may or may not be an actual detective, depending on who your characters are, and C, the bomber themselves. So you've got 3 perspectives on the bomb going off, and obviously 3 very different thought patterns when the bomb goes off and in the aftermath. But it's not just enough to kind of know that there are 3 different perspectives, and to have those 3 perspectives, but those perspectives have to forward the plot, otherwise there's no point in them being there. So you need to think about, so if you write about an explosion, what perspective would those 3 people have, and how would it forward your plot? So you have to know what you want to come out of the explosion, whether you what you're destroying, or what your bomber wanted to destroy, whether it was the right thing. Your detective character, are they close to the bomber? Is it surprise? Someone trapped in the building, obviously there's a lot of fear, but then there could be like another added part where they realize that the person crouching next to them in their sort of ruined bit of building is the bomber themselves. So you can sort of play around with that, but also decide. The important thing also is to decide what order you would put them in and why. Would you have the bomber narrating first to sort of build up tension that that there's this evil lurking in the building, or would you start with the victim, who then to increase the shock factor when suddenly there's an explosion? Or you can start with your detective character who frantically tried to stop it. But the order in which the narration comes out is actually really important as well. So let's stop that. From Anna, is it best to switch POV with a chapter break, or can you do it mid-scene? Should you always have a scene break? That's interesting. Basically, the most frantic POV hopping ever is in this fantastic book. And as you can see, where's my camera? There it is. Like, it's really short and really punchy. And she does it on the same page. She's got 5 characters. And she just puts their names at the top of the paragraph to tell you who he's talking to. I think the most important thing is that you know who he's talking, and we sort of go on to that a little bit further on. But yes, knowing who's talking and knowing where that person is and what situation they're in, and just shifting really, really fast to that. It's quite, it takes a lot of skill, but it is doable. I use chapter breaks from mine, and I like sort of like a nice clear delineation between them. But you could use like oh god, I've forgotten the word now. It's called a drop, or a 2-line drop, or something like that. So you just a gap in copy. But if you're going to do that, then I think you have to use that for a shift in perspective all the time. So you won't be able to use it for just a change of scene or something like that. As long as your reader knows that perspective is changing, especially if you're in first person. So things to ask yourself before committing to a multiple narrative. So we've said, lots of reasons to do it, but there are also things you have to make sure you've got covered if you're going to do it. What are the narrative reasons for doing this? So in the early days, I just used to switch perspective for fun, just to try it out, because I was bored with that last narrator, which actually can be a useful exercise, if you're really stuck in a slump, and you just think, just chuck a new narrator in, see what happens. But that's not something that will possibly make it to the final part of your book. You need to know what you're going to get out of it, I think, when you switch narrator, and you need to sort of have a bit of a plan. And I'm saying that as a complete not a pantser. You still need to know roughly what you want to do with this narrator. You need to ask yourself, is this new narrator significantly different from your main character, both in character and perspective? So, say you're writing about 2 friends and 2 female friends and a boy they both like, or something. Then having the 2 female friends might not be the most interesting 2 narrators, because they're quite similar. Maybe they like the same things, they've got a similar voice, that kind of thing. So you might choose to do one of the friends and the boy, or something like that, just to kind of make sure that there's a significant difference in perspective and in experience. And the friends are obviously together all the time, so the scenes will all be them together. So that's the good thing to ask. Different from character, different from perspective. Is your new narrator going to be as fleshed out as your main character? So obviously there's a lot of books, like the Save the Cat books and things like that, say that there only really is one true main character who has the main story arc and is the most transformed by it all. But your other characters still need to have an arc. If you're committing them to them being a narrator, they still need to be a person, a fully fledged person, not just there to feed you information or feed the reader information, or to point out something that the main character doesn't know. So yeah, you need a story arc for them. So yes, so in all the things we never said, and this can never not be real, each character has their own problems to fix and their own lessons to learn. The 2 stories are different. Oh, sorry, I've got a question here. I struggle with getting my character voices to sound different to each other. Oh, yeah, there's some of that coming up in a minute. Hold on. So I just want to get to the end of this list, and then I'm going to do a little voice-based exercise. So the other thing is to feel how your 2 narrator stories fit together. One of them might have an arc about gaining confidence, and the other one might have an arc about I'm trying to think of something that's the opposite of gaining confidence. It's an arc about learning to accept grief or something. But there still needs to be sort of some themes in common, and they've both got separate goals, separate inner goals, but their outer goal might be the same or something. But there needs to be some crossover between the two. Also, when you switch narrators, will your readers' hearts sink, or will they think, yay, so and so is back? Because I read a lot of books. This is probably many years ago, when I was really massively into Victoria Holtz and all these old school kind of gothic women's fiction that I read when I was a teenager. And sometimes you'd get really through a massive chunk of the book, rooting for this one character, and then you're just about, she's just always, there's a bit of a cliffhanger when you switch perspective, and then you turn it over and then there's a new person you have to get to know, and you're like, oh. So it's good to kind of make sure that you take steps so the reader doesn't feel like that. So maybe introduce that secondary character and make them a bit interesting in the other narrative, or find ways to do that, even if they're not alive in the same timeline. You can have someone looking at an old newspaper cutting or something, but just find a way to pique your reader's interest, so they go, oh look, it's so and so, oh, we're going to get to hear from them now. I think that's really interesting. Then also decide how often you want the person to speak. I tied myself in knots with both of my multiple narrator novels, trying to do alternate chapters, and sometimes you just need to have 2 chapters from the same person, and that's not the end of the world. The reader doesn't care, because the reader just wants to get, once they're with that character, they want to stay with that character. There is always a bit of a jump when you go to the next one, so I don't think the readers really care if it's 1 chapter or 2 chapters, but I think just having 1 chapter floating in the middle from another person, you need to have a really good reason to do that. So yes, if they're only speaking once, it has to be a good reason. And if it doesn't feel natural, don't keep putting them in. So if you do feel like you need to write 3 chapters or something from a different POV, then listen to your gut, I think. The other thing was pertaining to the earlier question, you have to separate those narratives so the reader knows exactly who's speaking. And now it's time for me to have a glass of water. Sorry, the last one is so important, I've given it his own section. So there's several technical ways you can do this. Changing style, switching from first to close third, changing tense from present to past tense, putting a character name at the top of the chapters, which obviously, or top of the paragraph, which we talked about before. If one POV is much shorter, so if you've got 1 chapter from your main character, and then you've got 1 little POV that shifted the POV, you can go for italics. I think if you use too many pages of italics, it gets annoying, or a different font or something like that. It can be a bit jarring, but different fonts. I'd love to know what publishers think of that. If there's anyone in publishing out there watching, let me know, because I think they might not like different fonts, but we can always use them and see what they think. Also, anything really that just cues the reader that they've turned the page and now they're in different territory. They're not in Kansas. Yeah, just really ideally, though, what you need to do is get your character's voice and their tone so distinctive that you can open the book anywhere and you know what that person, it's which person is speaking, and whether that's to do with the context of what they're doing. Okay, that's mainly how you know, but also just the tone of voice. So I was playing around with this and thinking, can I do this? And I thought the best way to experiment with it, to make sure your 2 characters' voices are different enough, is to try and think of a situation that they will both face. For example, in The Girl Who, Ellie is the fun YouTube stepsister character. She and Leah are both new stepsisters. Leah is obviously Leah and Ellie are very, very different. They don't really get on. They don't really want to be they don't want to move in with each other and have to share a living space just because their parents have fallen in love with each other. They're really, not on board with this at all. But nevertheless, sometimes when they're out, people mistake them for stepsisters. Now, Leah is a bit famous, so sometimes that makes Ellie quite awkward. And the first scene of my book is actually Ellie being mistaken for Leah's sister. And I'll show you the text if the slow thing will let me again. So here is what Ellie says. This is actually the first line she speaks in the book. She is not my sister. I've said it so many times now. I was thinking about having it printed on a t-shirt. The lady in the restaurant toilets blushed as she looked down, pretending to wash her hands really well as she realised what she'd said. Of course I wasn't Leah Stokes' sister. Everyone knows what happened to Leah Stokes' sister. So you've got Ellie being a bit flippant and a bit casual about it, and just sort of semi making it into a joke, but then you have like that sort of like bit of sadness because of Leah Stokes' sister was murdered. But I thought I could try putting Leah into that same situation where she's mistaken for being Ellie's sister, and try and write it from her point of view, if you see what I mean. So that's what I did. Now I've done something wrong. Your browser has blocked your screen. Click the screen icon in your address bar to allow access. Oh, great. I've now lost my ability to share. Hang on, just let me sort this out a second. Your browser's blocked your screen. Click the screen icon in your address bar. That's my address bar. Oh, yeah, there it is. Okay. So good with technology. So good. Okay, so I wrote this. So we were looking at this scene of Ellie being mistaken for Leah's sister, and I decided to ask how Leah would react if she was mistaken for Ellie's sister. And I've got this. So the woman has obviously said, "Are you sisters?" I don't answer. Instead, I turn away to wash my hands, leave it a beat. Let her realise the stupid thing she said. Even though I'm not looking at her, I can feel her squirm as she remembers exactly why that giggling, glitter-obsessed girl outside isn't my sister, that I don't have a sister anymore. So you can you got two completely different tones of voice there. So you've got, Ellie who's being flippant, and Leah who is, and Ellie's pretty upfront. She corrects her straight away and makes a flippant joke. And then Leah's her response is a bit more cruel and manipulative, as she can sometimes be, but there's also like an undercurrent of grief there as well. And the other thing to note is that Ellie, throughout The Girl Who, Ellie was written in past tense and Leah was written in present tense. So there's a sort of a grammatical reason like why the tone is different as well. And I have to say, I really hated doing that, and I swore I'd never do it again. And then I did it again in Dead Lucky because that past to present thing can be quite effective when you're switching perspectives. So that's something to try with your characters. Just try putting them in the same situation, having them respond completely in their own characters, in their own tone of voice, and see if your tone is different enough. Okay, so if anyone's got any more questions about the dual or multiple narrators, then give me a shout. I'll do some more questions at the end if anyone wants to. But I'm going to move now on to jumping around in time, doing sort of multiple. Can you have too many narrators? You know what? My response to this sort of thing is always that there's no actual rule that can't be broken, but you just have to be good enough to break it. So you have to be really super confident in your tone. You have to be really super confident that all those narrators are serving a purpose. I mean, this is 5 different people experiencing. So I don't know if you know the setting of this book, but basically it's 5 teenagers. They've got nothing in common. They are, except for the fact that they're all trapped in a house and the gardens during a terror attack. with a shooter going around, or several shooters going around, killing people at random, and they're all they're hiding in various different places of the house. They come together, they go apart, and everything changes for them that night. If you've got, Sarah Milano does it really confidently. She's got 5 people with 5 different things to say, and she's really focused on, on their characters and how the characters grow. And I think if you're confident about it and you've got the skills, then there's no such thing as too many narrators. However, you would really have to be pretty awesome to pull off like 20 narrators or something. You'd have to be a genius. So if you feel confident doing it, then I'd say go for it. Jumping around in time anyway, so lots of thrillers. Oh, hang on. I worry if I use lots of narrators, there'll be one that readers don't like and they'll skip their chapters to get to the favourite ones. Oh, flipping readers, honestly. Just kidding. I love readers. But yeah, I mean, readers always take up, there's so many readers that find characters irritating or whatever. It's such a personal thing. There's nothing you can really do about that. I remember worrying that Ellie was irritating, my glitter YouTube girl. And actually lots of people loved Ellie, but a few people did say to me that they found her irritating and they didn't like her tone of voice. But unfortunately, that's sort of, if enough people read your book, there will be people that don't like your characters. The important thing is that the character works in the narrative, and that you can also try and, if you're worried that they're not likable, do something to make them a bit more likable. So obviously, we can have unlikable characters are a real thing, and we can have them, and they're really good fun to play with. But it's the save the cat thing again, which I was reading recently, which is why I keep talking about it. But if you've got an unlikable character, you have your character save a cat in the first pages, so they're not irredeemably awful. So just find a couple of things to like in that character yourself and bring them out, and so to make sure your character isn't completely awful. I mean, that said, Cynthia Murphy's murderer is pretty unlikable, but that's the point. You're supposed to not like her. Okay, any more character questions, or shall I go on to time travel timelines? So lots of thrillers rely on secrets bubbling up onto the surface, and a dual timeline is a really good way of adding depth and detail and juiciness to the secrets while the present day characters remain unaware. So if you want somebody to know that this or that character is behaving really oddly because actually they had an affair with character C a few years ago, then you can do that in a dual timeline or in a flashback. Perhaps you want to include something that happened in an earlier generation. That's another reason to use it. Even parents, if you're writing about this, parents with secrets, sometimes you can have like a flashback to when they were young or something. But if you want to make somebody more relatable and their secret more relatable, then it's a good idea to sort of introduce a timeline jump back to when it happened. I originally did the dual timeline in Dead Lucky to try it, and it sounds really calculated, but I was really worried that no one would want to read about these, overprivileged influencers living in London, and they wouldn't sympathize with them very much because they're people who've made a heck of a lot of money for jumping around online and making fun, and not didn't have to do their A-levels, and they're just kind of free and easy. And I think I was worried that people wouldn't sympathize with them. And I think part of the thing I wanted to show about influencers was that a lot of them have come, especially in the earlier times of the internet, have come from nothing, or they've come from having quite a poor background, or they've all got problems in the background, and they're just ordinary kids who have made a lot of content and suddenly become really successful. And so I wanted to get that across. So I ended up having a flashback back to their school days, from the point of view of a sort of a jealous outsider called Sam, who was watching them all kind of form this channel and flourish together. So it started off because I wanted my characters to be more sympathetic and to examine their origins. But actually, like, you know, having Sam lurking in the background, like thinking quite hateful things and doing little things to sabotage their careers, was actually, you know, helped then add like a level of menace to the story as it began to unfold, and to sort of imply that there were secrets and there were things that went on back then that are having repercussions, you know, in the present day timeline. So it started off like as just me trying to make the characters more sympathetic, and ended up being a great plot device. So there's lots of different ways that you can do dual timelines. Well, I'm saying dual timelines, but obviously you can have more than 2 timelines. I mean, again, it's like, how much do you think you can pull off? So with timelines, you've got various different POVs that you can do, or structure tricks that you can do. So you've got, for POV, you can have dual timeline, same character, which is, you know, someone talking in the present day and then the same person talking 5 years ago or 10 years ago or whenever. So you can see how they got to the position they're in today. And you can slowly kind of learn their secrets in a more immediate way. Or you can have dual multiple timelines with different characters. So as I did with Dead Lucky, and as Vincent Ralph did with Lock the Doors, you can have sort of jumping around different timelines with from different perspectives that sort of underpin the story. And then you can, so those are the POV ways you can do it, but the structural ways you can do it, we talked about a little bit earlier. So you can switch time in alternate chapters, or not alternate chapters, every few chapters, whatever, or you can do timelines split in chunks. So you've got, 50 pages or 20 chapters from one person's point of view, and then part 2, and you get to part 2 and then you switch perspectives, and you switch timelines. Or you can have in-chapter flashbacks. So obviously flashbacks are really common. Everybody uses them just for, a few paragraphs when you're going to fill something in. But with the girl who, I ended up doing quite elaborate flashbacks. So Leah's point of view, the chapter would very often start in the present day, with her going, "Oh God, Ellie, she's so annoying," and then it would flash back to something that was relevant to what had just happened, but something coming up through her childhood. So Leah's story was actually told in flashback, from when her parents were murdered. So you got to see her sitting in the hospital in the aftermath of it, and then slowly her and her dad trying to piece their lives back together, and then her dad meeting Ellie's mum, and then the two timelines kind of catch up, and then you go right back to the murder to find out what happened at the actual scene. So that was a really complicated structure, but weirdly I never had anyone complain about that. So I think readers are much more adaptable than people say they are. Okay, so those are the various different ways you can do it. Oh, if you bring with a flashback in its prologue, will that put off agents? I don't think so. If your prologue is really effective and really grabby, then it will not put off agents. If they read a brilliant prologue, they are going to want more. So I've heard this said about, oh, I hate prologues. I've never really got that impression off of anybody. I've heard people say it on Twitter. Not that I talk about it with agents very much, but I've never heard it from agents or anything. With mine, there's not really, I didn't really, yeah. So I did still call it a prologue, whoops. And the first page is called prologue. In Dead Lucky, I start with the murder scene, because that's the most effective place to start. Literally, the guy's killed in the first line. and it hooks people in. And then chapter 2, I put Maxine one day before, because just to let the readers know that the guy isn't dead yet. And nobody had a problem with that at all. I think as long as it's effective, if it works, you can get away with anything. So you just have to be super confident, which I know is easier said than done. Good luck, Jessie. So what was I saying about timelines? Yes, I don't think I mentioned also the other option in the slide, which I said. So the other structural thing you can do is diaries of letters, archive material. So you can have your main character in the present day finding diaries and reading them, and then you go into them, or you could just have excerpts from the diary just plonked in the middle. As long as your reader understands what it's there for and what it is. If you do that, you don't necessarily have to switch in alternate chapters or whatever. Sometimes you can just do it in italics, do short revelations as your character is reading them. The thing I find, if you're having your character reading the diaries, I sometimes find it really tough writing that sort of thing, because if I was my character, I'd read the whole flipping thing and not drip feed it through the book. I'd find out right at the beginning who the murderer was. So that can be difficult, but there's ways of getting around that. You can have them finding like chunks of diary here and there or whatever. But yeah, so diaries are another great way of having a dual timeline. Yeah, podcasts are another thing, and also video, although I struggle with that. I've been trying to use video in YA narrative for the last 10 years, and I always find it really hard. But yeah, podcast episodes are really good. I did one once with the transcript of a TV show interspersed between chapters as well, which because that one was all in first person, and it was a good way of seeing the character from the outside. So yeah, that's there's lots of ways to do it, and yes, please suggest more if you've got any suggestions. So yes, the alternate chapters I did in Dead Lucky. Vincent Ralph in Lock the Doors does. So this part here, this whole first part of the book, is from one character's perspective, from Tom, the main character, and then you get to a certain point and the narrative shifts to someone else. And I don't want to give too much away, but it's really awesome. And the narrative shifts to someone else, and the timeline jumps back to that someone else in their childhood. And you get to understand, all of a sudden you go, oh, that's what makes sense. So it's very, very effective. And before you know it, you've put Tom on hold. You know you're going to come back to Tom, and you're just really immersed in this other story. And the other person that does a big, I have to do an honorable mention of Fingersmith every time I talk about twists and timelines and things like that, because Fingersmith changes narrator and does shifts to a different timeline right in the middle of it, by Sarah Waters. I know it's not young adult, but give it a read. The other thing I said, use of diaries and letters. That's what Amy McCall does with Mina and the Undead. And within this option, I said, it's tricky to kind of distribute them through the book, but you can also get really creative and fun, like you said, with the podcasts, or you could just have her stumbling on, or your character stumbling on new bits of information and piecing them together like that. The advantage of this one is that if your main reason to skip around in time is just conveying information, then you can use like newspaper reports or something like that, something that's, you're not introducing a new character. Because the other thing the second timeline needs, obviously, is the same as Narrators. It needs to have its own compelling arc, and you want jumping from between them to be equally frustrating and exciting for the readers. So you want them to know what happens next in both timelines. So just as you chose your main character, you probably need to check which is going to be your primary timeline. So that's one tip. And another tip would be to I think a lot of writers do this. I do it. I use different coloured sticky notes for each timeline, so that at least, you know, when I've got it all up on the notice board, I can see how many chapters we'd have from each, whether I'm leaning too far on one way. I've got two into one story, and I need to bring in the other one, and where the climaxes are coming in the stories, etc. So getting the pace and the rhythm right, it really helps if you've got the color-coded WAS names. I'm not great at color-coded notes at all. I'm rubbish at it, but it does really help me with that. The other thing to do is to novelist Hannah Mary McKinnon, I found on a tip on her website, which is to write your idea as a short story first. So if you've got this idea for multiple timelines that doesn't quite work, maybe just see if you can do it in a much shorter form, see if it, you know, both sides of the timeline are holding up. The other thing is when you're making your switch, the same as when you're making a switch from narrator, when you make a switch in timeline, try to use something in your first paragraph that gets the reader in place instantly. So, I don't know, say, for example, your 1980s character loves purple. So, you know, you've got like, he was dressed in purple, of course, or something like that. And then you go, okay, it's Tommy, we're in 1982. You can put on your mental leg warmers and settle in, and settle into the 80s. So it's a good idea to kind of, you know, include a few little clues right in that first part just to make it less jarring. And sometimes it takes, I mean, I read in big gulps and I just flip to the next chapter and dive in, and sometimes it takes me a little while to adjust and go back and go, oh, okay, I'm in the 80s now. So that sort of thing really helps people like me. So the other thing I would say is that your timelines, it makes it much more powerful if they interconnect. Even if the point of your story isn't to bring them, like converge them at the end, even if you're having like someone who's long dead in the 1920s and someone in the present day, you know, you still need some kind of interplay between the stories somehow, and you can do it in visual cues, you could do it like by having the chapters reflecting each other. So, you know, you have a dramatic chase in one and a dramatic chase in the next one, or something like that, so that, you know, so that there is some relationship between the two. That means you feel like you're reading not two separate stories, but one whole that's going to make sense in the end. And also, you know, you can also make it quite creepy in a way. So, you know, you can have Tommy in the 80s obsessing over his Rubik's Cube, and then your other character, like in 2023, noticing a broken, bloody Rubik's Cube on the forest floor when they go for a walk. And, you know, it's just, you know, you can really kind of lay little fun, creepy clues for your readers by doing that as well. The other thing is, another tip is to read your, when you're proofreading, or when you're you finish your draft and you want to make sure your timelines hang together, it's a good idea to maybe separate both of the timelines out into two separate documents and read them separately. And then you can make sure that, you know, Tommy's outfits are consistent all the way through, or you know, your other character is also consistent all the way through, because sometimes when you switch between chapters you can forget that, you know, Tommy broke his leg in the last scene or something. So it's good for continuity to give those a proper read separately. And also, if you're doing something complex, then beta readers are definitely your friend, because, you know, you get too close to your subject by the end of it, so you need someone else to read it and say, well, this confused the hell out of me, or I loved it, please more. So yeah, has anyone got any questions to ask about switching timelines? How do you find beta readers? Good question, because I was rubbish at this for a long time. I had this was me writing like I was doing my exams next to a cheaty person or something. I just hid away my writing for a really, really long time, and I still find it really hard to share. But there are so many if you make connections online, you can find online writers groups, or you can find local writers groups. But I would actually thoroughly recommend finding a tribe of writers who are writing similar stuff to you, or just generally that you get on with and that you can trust. I mean, some people just ask their mates, and you can do that too. But all my mates are journalists, and I'm scared of them. So I tend to ask other kind of, like when I was in, I belonged to a Slack group called Writers International, where we all met through an editing course on Curtis Brown, and we stayed in touch afterwards. And you know, it's really great to be able to share my work with them, because they're not, there's a couple of other YAs, but they're not all YA, they're not all crime. So, you know, they're coming to it completely fresh, and it's really helpful. So find your tribe is actually one of my biggest bits of writing advice ever. It was so much easier once I started talking to people. So part 3 of this, the final countdown, is basically the fact that everything has to fit together in the end. And it's so slick doing this, so slick. There we go. Am I sharing screen now? Yes, I am, I think. So it all has to be brought together. So there's various different ways you can do this. You have to seed in the cross-references throughout the story, like I was saying with the Rubik's Cube or whatever. It doesn't have to be something that blatant, but just seed it in so that the two stories feel like they have a relationship with each other. You know, that they can be going to the same cafe 20 years apart, or they can be so, you know, if they don't actually touch properly, or they can both go to the cinema and be sitting in the same cinema, like, you know, rows apart from each other or something like that. I don't know, but just ways to make it into play. Both timelines and perspectives, mostly in most books, they begin to converge halfway through, so they get closer and closer. Certainly happened with the girl who, when I said Leah did all those flashbacks, her perspective, you know, she started to catch up with the present day around, you know, just after the midpoint of the book. And it sort of feels natural actually to bring it together at that time. And then the last third, you probably the second timeline or third or however many you have will probably fall away, and you will concentrate on your main character, or on your main timeline, your main character, for the last part of the book, because you know, it's pacier, right? You're not breaking up anymore. You at the beginning of the book, you have the nice little cliffhanger, and then you have another nice little cliffhanger, and then you switch timeline again and have another one. But then the book, you know, towards the end of the book, it's like, you know, event, and the pace is too fast for you to keep switching backwards and forwards. So you need to pick a lane and stick with it. And that doesn't mean you can't refer to your final, your other timeline, or you can't have a little final image of that second timeline or whatever, but just to your finale focuses on that one timeline. Generally. So I found a fun a writer called Matt Bell has done a Substack column on this, and he broke down his much more technical approach than I have, and he broke down several different novels into with multiple timelines, to see kind of how they paced it. And he did one for the 10,000 Jaws of January, which is a book that I've read and enjoyed, so I was quite interested in this, by Alex E. Harrow. And it shows how the two timelines and perspectives merge. So it starts out with largely alternating chapters. So you've got 2 chapters from 1, 2 chapters from 2, and then 1 chapter from 1, 1 chapter from 2, and then it sort of alternates. And then suddenly, so that alternates as far as chapter 7, which is about 2/3 through the book. And then all of a sudden it's just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and epilogue. 7 chapters from concentrating on the main timeline. So, you know, and generally all of the books that he looked at did something almost the same. So there is a pattern there. If you don't want to follow that rule, that's absolutely fine. Just as long as you've got the confidence and you know how you're going to tackle that pacing issue. then I have no problem with anyone breaking any of these rules. So basically, that is what I know about jumping perspectives and timelines. Anyone's got any questions or suggestions or recommended reads, then please feel free to write them in the box, and I'll do my best to answer. And if not, you can always message me on Instagram. I'm Andreina Cordani, as spelt here in my, where it says at the bottom of the screen. And I'm the same on Twitter at Andreina Cordani. And I am on TikTok, I'm A Cordani XO. So please look me up, and best of luck. Oh, Anna. Money by Rose. Taylor Jenkins Reid has multiple timelines and narrators. Love that book. I'm going to write that down. Yeah. So really, I was so looking for sort of more fun timeliney books when I was writing this, and it's really put me in the mood for one. Thank you. Good luck, everyone, with your projects. And yeah, I really am looking forward to seeing some twisty timeliney stuff. Oh yes, do you look? That's always a good one. And so, yeah, if there's no other questions, I will say goodbye and best of luck with all of your writing. Thank you so much for sitting through, and I hope this has been helpful for you.